Hello everyone, this is an interview with the founder and developer of Blackmill Games, Jos. Blackmill Games is the company behind the title Verdun, which is known for its historical accuracy in terms of World War I shooters, and also the upcoming title Tannenberg. Note that I received 3 copies of the game, thus I might be a bit biased. And the topics we cover are what Jos thinks about Battlefield 1, then how map research was done, then lessons learned from Verdun, and also the question why World War I in general. And there are a few other topics we talk about. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Let me know in the comment section. I noticed there's a lot of discussion going on between fans of Battlefield 1 and fans of Verdun, and I would be really interested in your perspective. Of course, it might be a bit biased, but what is your opinion on Battlefield 1?
Actually, it may surprise you, but I think Battlefield One is actually I really like it. So I think okay, let's just disregard the difference in gameplay because we're talking about mainly talking about the historical angle in our context here. I think when you have a AAA franchise like EA and Dice, they have to sort of continue their AAA franchise series. I think what they did within that framework, they did a pretty good job at converting the history of World War One into that format. So I kind of respect how they approached it. Um, I mean, I've been talking to the guys from the Great War Channel who um, also helped with the project, and the team behind that actually appreciates the history. So um, from their intention, at least they made a great effort, and I appreciate the historical elements that are in Battlefield One as well. So I actually like to play it as well. I mean, the whole team actually has been longtime fans of the series. So it's hard to hate on it when it also combines that with the gameplay of Battlefield. Um,
So you basically have the more the for one that you have the business approach because you see okay it's a AAA game, you can go down the full historical or the mostly historical accuracy road like you did with Verdun.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, you can see where they had to make the trade-offs. So one of the trade-offs is weapons. I mean, basically they used almost exclusively prototype weapons, semi-autos, submachine guns, some maybe a one-off experimental machine guns, and the submachine guns, etc. Yeah, you can see that why they had to do it. They work within the framework of like this high intensity, high pace shooter.
Where
But
bolt action
okay,
rifles don't really work so well.
no, exactly. But they try to sort of incorporate that. Maybe they could have been a bit more prominent, but I mean, the way they've done it, I think I certainly respect the way they've done it. But if you step away from the weapons, I think I'm not trying to. I mean, they're sort of a competitor between the quotation marks, but what I've done, for instance, with the multiplayer operation campaigns, where they have like this diary entries when you start off a multiplayer mission. I think they've done a great job of incorporating the history and the offensives behind it, so it's really immersive from that perspective. I mean, the gameplay itself, the way, and I think this is where the main difference is between Battlefield and for instance, that the way the ebb and flow of battle is not really accurate to you know uh to I mean the types of warfare, the trench warfare is not really done justice with the gameplay that Battlefield offers. If you have
Yeah, I played it a
a
bit and I can't really remember seeing any trenches or too many.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So I mean, on that part, that's really where we certainly have a more claim of legitimacy in that regard, because I mean, we sort of embedded the attack counter attack mechanics or at least for Verdun into the core of the game. And yeah, but there's just a sort of a sandbox game with vehicles and all sorts of weapons thrown together. So
Yeah, I think one interesting aspect is that a lot of people think like that people just hate on a game if they know more about history, but a lot of people I know actually have no problem with Battlefield 1 or with some other games, because I think if you look at the bigger picture, you see, okay, this is a AAA game, they need to attract a certain audience, and there's also limits what you can do in gameplay. And if you go full historically accurate, well, you have one spawn, and then it's over. So this is always very interesting that people that are more involved and also with the whole development and everything, they are usually way more lenient than some hardcore fans, because I mean, this reminds me basically what a history professor said about military history, and he said um, military history, you shouldn't write it from the trench perspective, because if you look only from the one soldier who saw everything, everything gets a bit wrong, or very wrong, because it's just two pairs of eyes looking out of a trench will not provide this.
yeah, but I think, I mean, it's a gradient. I mean, we don't cover, for instance, this example, we don't cover digging latrines. I mean,
Yeah.
90% of or a large portion of actually fighting in the trenches or in any war, I guess, is doing logistics, doing mundane tasks, waiting for the enemy, and then a small portion is the actual the combat itself.
War is 99.9% boring, and then 0.1% action, but that action is deadly.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a proportion which we try to cover. I mean, and of course within that there's also degrees of realism, and we also had to make some compromises here and there on historical historical accuracy, but it's always a trade off between what you're going to show.
Now, in Verdun, you covered the Western Front, and now you're going to cover the Eastern Front. Was this already planned in the beginning, or what is the reason to go for the Eastern Front?
Basically, it's been our intention to make an all encompassing experience uh, of World War One. So including all the other fronts. It's just that, I mean, the Western Front. All right. So yeah, basically, when we started Verdun, we really wanted to include as much as possible, as much history as we could. So, and that was from the get go. But I mean, of course, you have limited resources. Certainly when we started off as with 3 people, I mean, really wanted to focus, and we started small. So we started with France versus Germany in Verdun period. But as time grew on, we saw that a lot of people liked our project, and once we brought it out on early access on Steam, we gained some traction, and we could fund the rest of the development. From there on, our goals were sort of validated by the reality. So based on that, we sort of extended, and with the addition of Horse of War after the launch of Verdun, we're able to add Belgians and Americans, something we did not think we would be able to do at the beginning. Now, for the sort of completing the Western Front in a way, I mean, there's lots of worse Indians or Senegalese or Portuguese or whatever, but sort of completed the main bulk of factions and weaponry that was used on the Western Front and campaigns. We really wanted to put the focus on the other big theater. So we had no we didn't have a preference per se when we started to select the next front we would do. But the community helped us with selecting the Eastern Front, and I mean, in terms of size and importance, from an historical perspective, I think the Eastern Front deserved to be the next in line, basically, in this. What basically has become the World War One 1418 game series. So we really wanted this to be the next installment in a series of games.
Okay, yeah. So, and why the focus on World War One?
The focus for World War One basically comes from my childhood. I've had sort of a lifelong fascination with World War One. I visited the battlefield when I was 10 years old. My friends were amateur archaeologists, and they were digging around there. So I remember like seeing bones stick out of the ground in in the Verdun area. So that's where it comes from. And since then, I've always wanted to do something with it. So after going to university and meeting with Mike and Matt, we teamed up together. They had a lot of experience with games, so we teamed up together and made this uh, into a into a World War One game. So that's sort of the backstory of the why World War One.
So now, from what I heard and saw in the game, you put a lot of emphasis on having good maps, and I think you put also a lot of research into them. How exactly did you do the research and to get the maps properly?
We basically gathered as much visual information of the battlefields. Of course, I mean some of them we actually visited. So if we talk about Vauquois, which will and Douaumont, we are very familiar with those because they're the same friends still own a house near in the Verdun area, so we visited the places every now and then. So this creates some kind of familiarity with the the landscapes. I mean, if you live in California, you may have less of an knowledge about northwestern European, North French, Belgian landscapes than if you've actually visited. Or so it makes it easier to familiarize yourself with the landscape in which the battlefields were placed. So the when you look at how we structure the maps, you always take into account how especially for Verdun and the maps that are based on trench warfare, we really wanted to show that there was uh, the landscape before the war sort of is sort of visible through um, even though it's almost completely destroyed. So that's a factor. The original landscape on which it's based, that's a layer. So you would have tree hedges or ditches, and those would be converted into trenches. So that's sort of an underlying layer of the levels. And then of course we had lots of visual material, pretty much sort of got all the digital information possible, visuals, um, and sort of compiled this into a map. And for some maps we took geodata as well. So if you have Douaumont or Champagne, those were entirely based on geodata. So that's actually one on one. If you walk on the fort, it's exactly accurate.
Oh, nice. So, did you use aerial footage as well?
Yeah. I mean, in the case of, well, in the case of Douaumont, there's not yeah, of course, you always see these photos of the shelled fort in certain stages.
Yeah.
Um, with Douaumont, we had a particular task because we wanted to recreate the fort at a specific time. With the other maps, we did not have a specific point in time in which we wanted to recreate the levels. We more wanted to, demonstrate the Western Front as sort of a diverse entity. Um, yeah, where in Flanders you would have a flat, muddy sort of Passchendaele landscape which would contrast with a more forested and hilly Vosges landscape. So um, we we took, for instance, in the case of Flanders, we did take aerial photos, which you can see clearly. The was it the Menin Road, the main supply road, and you have very good photos of that landscape. And then, of course, in the case of Douaumont, aerial photos, but also trench maps. original trench maps. You could see where the trenches were, and we took those layouts and we overlaid them on the map, and our level designer basically dug the trenches based on the location.
Oh, nice. And did you visit archives or anything, or was everything online or from books?
Yeah, online books. We have plenty of books as well. We have a nice book with all sorts of maps and graphs. Archives. No, no physical archives, other than the of course the physical locations of Doelmond and Verdun, but I don't think they count as archives.
Yeah, not typically. No,
I,
archives
I
would be like really like the people having the old documents and everything. And
yeah, I did hear at some point that the Peace Palace in The Hague has a huge archive of, because there was a commission after the war which investigated the loss of the war, German, and that those documents ended up in the Peace Palace, and there's apparently a treasure of information there. But I've always read, somebody told me that once, like a decade ago, and I always wanted to visit that, but there's never come to it. So might be interesting. Maybe somebody can debunk this, but
yeah. And did you cooperate with any historians, or I mean, okay, you have those amateur archaeologues you're talking about, but did you with any official institution or something?
No, no, we did not. No, not cooperate. We had at some point we had somebody, some official historian who graduated. Who did? Oh, no, he actually did his thesis on games versus an implementation of uh, depiction of war in video games, and he helped us with background information on Battle of Verdun. But basically, we've been relying on community effort a lot. I mean, I personally come from, before I did Verdun and teamed up with the M2H brothers. I I was into modding, so I was briefly part of the Battlefield 1918 team, and sort of, but those were also very community based, unofficial quote historians who just help around, and these people know a lot. I mean, now working on Tannenberg, we have people, Russians who constantly point mistakes out in the uniforms, little details, etc., etc. And people are, especially reenacting communities, are really passionate about getting everything accurate. So when you anger or those people, you need to change something. So that's sort of our has been our way forward on this.
Yeah, because reenactors don't not only run around with weapons, they also know usually the tactics.
Yeah, yeah. It's cool. I once got a last year we got a postcard from somebody, a reenactor from Germany, who sent a postcard, and that he really liked what we did. So that we actually got a physical postcard from somebody who really enjoyed the game, and then he had to, like, a photo with his unit on it. So it's uh yeah, it's great. But it also stated in on the card that there's some that the one of the gewehrs used the wrong type of bayonet. So it
Typically German
yeah,
nitpicking.
yeah. No, yeah, it's really they're really passionate about it, and that's great. That's great. I mean, we people play the game and they want to have, well, I wouldn't say an authentic experience, because I mean there's different degrees of that. Of course, we cannot simulate everything, but at least want to have the impression that we did all we could to make it as good as possible. And this is one of those things which is relatively easy in terms of making a uniform, not a costume.
Yeah.
Uh, that's looks like something that a costume designer made rather than something that's actually accurate. I mean, this is also something we talk again about comparison to AAA. They have to make it look cool, popped colors and
Yeah,
the reality is much more dorky. It doesn't fit. It's not as sleek. Uh, Helmet's too big or small. That's something we wanted to really show in terms of uniforms and uniforms. Even go further than that, in that we wanted to show the progression of the uniforms.
y-
When you level your squad, you level your uniform, etc. That system we put in place specifically to have the extra outlets for this historical content to be shown, and that's appreciated by the fans, uh, 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 the reenactors, but also the general uh, uh, gamer audience who say, "Oh well, this is look at Verdun. They made this weird French uniform that looks really weird. The red pants."
yeah. I noticed. I think I played it. I played it once for 5 minutes, and then basically the first time I really played it, it was on stream, and I let my fans tell me what to do, my subscribers and followers, and then I realized how much different squad types and everything was in there, and then oh, and then vote for the album core and for this units and this, and I only played the Germans, and it was like, how many different types are in there, and everyone looks different. I was like, okay, I'm completely confused. So I saw quite a lot, and I probably only saw the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, that's kind of what disappointing from our perspective, that sometimes this content is not surfacing because people don't. It's not an easy game to navigate, especially the squad leveling mechanic is sort of complicated. We wanted to coming from okay, the innovation from for done as a product, or as a game, comes from the historical novelty, because we were the first to actually, we were around before Battlefield 1. It's hard to imagine that, if you know, it's hard to imagine actually around before that. But yeah, we were the first to do it as in the standalone title. But we also wanted to, because we were gamers, we did play Battlefield. We wanted to innovate on the squad mechanics, but that sort of made it the system we made around that, where you have to play together in order to sort of grow the level squad. The squad level. It's quite complicated. So it's sad that sometimes people don't see all the details that went into that and that result from that. The uniforms, because the system is rather complicated. But it's good that it's in there. That's we try to make innovations on more than just one direction. It's not just a World War One version of Call of Duty or Red Orchestra or whatever.
Yeah, how much did Red Orchestra influence your game, by the way?
Yeah, when you look at gunplay, there certainly has been influences. I mean, the way you align the sights, the slower pace of the game. Um, that that's pretty much the influence of Red Orchestra. I think, yeah, we took influence from we're the product of all of the games that came before us. So there's things from Battlefield that you can recognize. Call of Duty also. There's certain generic, certain tropes from other shooters that you can find in Verdun. But then again, the gameplay itself is rather something that and the squad leveling is something that hasn't been done before at all. So we had a much more complicated system before that, where each sort of different weapon you chose also had a name with it. So we had a Beobachtungsoffizier, and you had I think we had about 200 names at the end. We removed all of those because it became a bit too much work to put into, especially when the consoles and translating. But we had all of those. You would love those German names because you
Yeah.
like to pronounce those, but they were all over that. Yeah,
You
yeah.
can send me the list and I read it out. I'm pretty sure some people would gather for that. So, I think let's move to the next question, and this is probably more of a technical, but you can answer on every level you want. So, what lessons did you learn from Verdun and you applied for your next title, Tannenberg?
Um, that's a good one. Well, I think what we learned from Verdun, and that we see that now again, is that we're currently building a new game mode around the Eastern Front um, style of war, and we really wanted to put the focus on the Kesselslacht, the encirclement battles. You know, Tannenberg being the prime example of that, and there've been several other examples of that, and we really wanted to sort of distill the essence of combat on the Eastern Front as we did with the Western Front. So, uh, trench warfare on the Western Front. Of course, there also being trench warfare on the Eastern Front, but uh, thematically, we wanted to focus on the openness and the sort of the different style of warfare on that front. Now, in Verdun, we went through quite a long process in order to sort of polish and tweak and get to the stage where front lines is as it is today. The early access period lasted quite a long time, and uh, our initial intuition for Tannenberg was, okay, we're just gonna release it and be done. Or no, not be done, because we're still gonna do all sorts of upgrades and patches, but sort of that's it. But what experience taught us from Verdun is that it actually takes time and working with the community, and sort of to refine this gameplay. So what we will be doing, and what we learned from Verdun, is that we're going to take an early access period. So the 16th of November, we're going to early access, and we're going to take an undetermined amount of time, but preferably somewhere in the first quarter, until the first quarter of next year, to sort of polish this mechanic. And we're still debating internally how certain rules should be, and how the game flow should be, and that takes into account the consideration of gameplay, gunplay, meta, gameplay rules, versus or in synchrony with the history behind it, with the type of warfare. So that must be sort of in sync as much as we did also in Verdun. So that's one of the things we learned from Verdun, which we're going to apply in Tannenberg.
Okay, beforehand you mentioned the Kesselschlacht, the encirclement battle, and in which way can I see that in the game in Tannenberg?
So what we'll try to do is that the maps are much bigger, and for them they're linear in that they're deep. They consist out of 4 layers on trenches on either side of the central no man's land, and the battle can go either way. In Tannenberg, it's more based around a sort of grid system where you can capture certain strategic points on the map, and it is entirely possible that you will be encircled, because each front being quite an expansive territory. At one point you may be in the middle of the woods, and you've been encircled by the enemy because they've captured the area behind you. And this creates all sorts of strategic and tactical possibilities. But I mean, this is something we're still working out the details of, because we wanted to balance the fun and the game. We don't want this to be a walking simulator, so or a game where you don't see your enemies, etc. So it must be sort of the balance between concentrated power, concentrated players in a certain per square meter, which is pretty high in Verdun. I don't think any other game generally comes to the level of players per square meter, especially when you take the smaller maps into account. There were 32 players stuck on a map that's maybe 20, 30 meters wide. That creates quite an intense amount of combat. But with Tannenberg, the maps are much larger, so we're have to balance that. We also upped the player count from 32 to 64, and we're gonna do more to accommodate for these kinds of battles to take place. So
I only played a little bit of Verdun, so maybe I missed a lot of the part. Is there also a map level? I mean, operational maps basically between the matches that, because you said you can't get encircled, can you get encircled only on the map you're playing in 3D, or is
yeah,
there another
it's on the
meta
technical
map
level. Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
technical level? So not like Red Orchestra 2 where you had the campaign mode where there were several
No, we
okay.
don't have a strategic level, kind of like Heroes and Generals. So you're talking about this,
That's
this
also.
max this two layered system. Yeah, we had the debate about competitive and things like that. Maybe we were gonna step into this direction because the certainly Eastern Front lends itself for that. I mean, encirclement on a strategic level, of course, being the one-on-one translation of the Kesselslacht. But we wanted to do this in like a microcosm, so on a technical level, which I'm sure happened frequently.
I mean, since you created a very historically accurate game, especially when it comes to maps and uniforms and everything, was there any recognition or reaction from, let's call it the establishment, like academia, non-gaming media, like newspapers or TV or anything?
Yeah, well, for instance, talk about media. We were covered in French newspapers, the French regional newspaper when we did the fan event last February. Yeah, people appreciate it. From academia, well, like I said, we had the guy doing the thesis on our project, and there've been several also in Ireland and Scotland, I think. There were projects which involved us in their academic work. So there has been some appreciation from the media, and we see this also in when the game press writes about us. Uh, there we have several quotes where people say they really appreciate the amount of historical research went into it. So the game press certainly also finds it the appreciation for this.
Jos, thank you very much for joining us and giving us some answers and insights into Verdun and Tannenberg.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It's really interesting talking to you.